Have you ever dreamed of something so fiercely that your heart pounded with every beat, only to have it crushed without mercy by the very people you love most? If the answer is yes, then this story is for you. Stick with me, because this is Emily's journey, a 25-year-old from Austin, Texas, where music is the air she breathes, the soul she carries. Yet her family became the chains that bound her dreams. She crumbled under their pressure, shattered in agony, but then rose up brighter than ever, like a flame no one could extinguish. Don't look away, don't miss a beat, because the end of this tale will hit you with a rush of inspiration, I promise. Come on, step into Emily's world with me, where it all begins with a melody, and that same melody changes her life forever. Emily Harper grew up in a sleek, modern mansion in the heart of Austin. Not the rustic log cabin you'd see in a cowboy flick, but a glass-walled fortress gleaming with wealth and heavy with expectations thicker than concrete. Her family, the Harpers, were a dynasty of high-profile lawyers, the kind of people the whole city tipped their hats to. Her father, Richard, a towering man with a voice like thunder, loved to boast about the million-dollar cases he'd won. Her mother, Eleanor, sharp as a blade and cold as ice, ran the law firm like an unyielding queen. To them, life was about prestige, money, and swanky dinner parties with expensive wine and million-dollar handshakes. But Emily didn't fit that world. Her heart beat to the strum of a guitar, sang to the wild, free tunes she heard in the dusty bars on 6th Street. Music wasn't just a hobby, it was her breath, the blood pumping through her veins. From the start, Emily was different. While other kids played house, she'd sit in a corner, cradling the beat-up old guitar her granddad left her, plucking clumsy but passionate notes. She still remembers the looks her parents gave her when they caught her playing. Not pride, but disappointment, as cold as a winter wind slicing through the Texas plains. "Singing and strumming are for kids, Emily," her mom once snapped, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. "You need to grow up, study law, carry on the family legacy." Her dad was worse. He didn't even speak, just shook his head, a gesture that felt like a death sentence for her dreams. But Emily didn't give up. She buried that passion deep in her heart, like a precious gem hidden under dry, cracked earth. Then came that sweltering June night in Austin, when Emily did something she'd never dared. She ran. She threw on an old t-shirt, pulled a baseball cap low over her face, and hugged that precious guitar, her granddad's only gift before he passed. She slipped into a dive bar, where the stench of cheap beer mixed with rowdy laughter. No one in the crowd knew who she was, and that felt like freedom. When she sang, her voice trembled, not from fear, but from release. The notes poured out like a river breaking a dam, carrying her sorrow, her joy, and the burning hunger inside her. The crowd clapped, cheered. One guy even yelled, "Kid, you were born for the stage." For the first time, Emily felt truly alive, but she didn't know that this fleeting happiness was just a flicker of light before the storm. When she crept back home that night, her mother's eyes were waiting at the door, icy, furious, signaling a war about to erupt. Emily froze in the doorway, her heart hammering like it might burst through her chest. Eleanor's gaze, sharp as a steel blade, cut through the dark, pinning her in a terrifying silence. The old guitar, still warm from her hands, now felt like a guilty secret she couldn't hide. "Inside now!" Eleanor's voice rang out, not loud, but sharp enough to slice through any thought of defiance. Emily stepped over the threshold, and suddenly the air in that fancy mansion turned suffocating, as if the glass walls were closing in. Her father, Richard, sat in his pricey leather armchair, a glass of whiskey in hand, his dark brown eyes glaring at her with undisguised contempt. Her little sister, Sarah, leaned against the kitchen doorway, red lips curling into a mocking smirk, like a cat that had just caught a mouse. "Back from your little street-singing gig, huh?" Sarah purred, her voice sweet but laced with thorns. Emily gripped the guitar strap tighter, fighting to stay calm, but she knew the storm had arrived. "What do you think you're doing, Emily?" Richard's voice boomed, low and rumbling like thunder. Each word a hammer blow to her pride. Sneaking out, singing in those filthy joints? You want to make a laughingstock of the Harper name? Emily opened her mouth to reply, but Eleanor cut her off, swift and ruthless as a sword strike. No excuses, Emily. We've made it clear. Music is useless, a game for losers. You're going to law school, taking up the family business. That's your duty. Duty. The word stabbed her heart like a needle, dragging up years of living in the frigid shadow of their expectations. But I don't want to be a lawyer, she blurted, her voice shaking but firm. I want to sing, to live with music. That's me. That's my dream. Silence fell, heavy as the sky before a downpour. Then Richard laughed, a dry, cold bark with no mercy. A dream? You think dreams pay the bills? Stop being naive. Sarah sauntered forward, her heels clicking on the hardwood like a drumbeat of doom. You know, Emily, she said, her voice soft but venomous. I had dinner with some law school friends last night. They asked about you, and I had to lie. Say you were studying somewhere to save face. But now, you've made yourself a failure all on your own. No help needed. Emily spun toward Sarah, eyes blazing. What did you tell them? She demanded. But Sarah just shrugged, smirking. Just the truth, that you've got no future. Her words poured fuel on the fire raging in Emily. But before she could strike back, Eleanor landed the final blow. Enough, she said, rising, her tall, thin frame looming like a ghost in the dim light. From now on, you don't go anywhere but school and home. We're enrolling you in law school this fall, and that thing, she pointed at the guitar, is gone from your life. Before Emily could process it, Richard stood, strode over, and yanked the guitar from her hands. No! Che, she screamed, lunging to grab it, but he was stronger, faster. He hurled it to the floor with a sickening thud, then stomped down hard. A horrific crack tore through the room, like her heart splitting in two. She dropped to her knees, trembling hands brushing the wreckage. Snapped strings, a broken neck, a body cracked open like an unhealable wound. Hot tears spilled down her cheeks, splashing onto the polished floor. But no one in her family flinched. Richard turned away, as if he'd just taken out the trash. Eleanor stared, her gaze unyielding. This is for your own good, she said, flat as a judge's ruling. Sarah giggled softly, leaning down to whisper in Emily's ear. You're done, sis. Stop dreaming. Emily looked up, tears blurring Sarah's smug face, but something else ignited inside her. Not pain, but fury, resolve. She stood, legs shaky but steadier than ever. You think breaking my guitar breaks me? She said, voice choked but sharp as a blade. You're wrong. I don't need this house, your money, or the future you've mapped out. She turned to Sarah, locking eyes with her sister's arrogance. And you, Sarah, keep living as their pride and joy, but don't expect me to bow to you. Without waiting for a reply, Emily bolted upstairs, threw some clothes into a backpack. Her mother's shout, Emily, get back here, echoed below, but she didn't listen. She climbed out the window, and the night swallowed her as she fled the prison she'd once called home. That night, under Austin's starry sky, Emily had nothing but her bare hands and a shattered heart. But inside her, an iron will took root, a will to live, to sing, to prove she wasn't the failure they thought. She walked on, never looking back, her sneakers pounding the pavement, each step a vow. I won't live the life you want. I'll be me. And in that moment, amid unbearable pain, the seeds of her next journey were sown. A journey even Emily couldn't yet see, but one thing was certain. She wouldn't give up. Emily tore through the Austin night, her sneakers slamming the pavement, her ragged breaths blending with the hot summer wind. She didn't know where she was going, just that every step hacked away at the suffocating grip of that house, severing her from her father's scornful glare, her mother's icy voice, and Sarah's venomous grin. The backpack on her shoulder was light, just a few clothes and some spare change, but her heart weighed a ton, carrying the wreckage of the world she'd lost. That guitar, Her soul, her granddad's memory, was now just splintered echoes in her mind, each crack a brutal reminder. She'd lost everything. Yet amid that pain, a tiny flame flickered, not to destroy, but to rebuild. "I won't give up," she whispered to herself, her voice hoarse but steady. That night, under the faint glow of streetlights, Emily began her fight for independence, a rocky road she'd never imagined. Day one hit her pride like a sucker punch. With a few bucks in her pocket, she found a rundown room in East Austin, peeling walls, a moldy stench rising from the worn carpet, and neighbors shouting, seeping through thin partitions. But it was all she could afford. She needed a new guitar, needed music to live, to breathe, so she threw herself into work. By day, she scrubbed dishes in a greasy diner, hands slick with soapy water, back aching from hours on her feet. By night, she waited tables in a noisy bar, hauling heavy trays of beer through a crowd of drunks, biting her tongue at their crude catcalls. Every crumpled tip she stuffed in her pocket brought her closer to a new guitar, not to replace her granddad's, but to keep his dream alive. After 2 grueling months, she held a cheap pawnshop guitar, scratched wood, buzzy strings. But when she strummed that first note, she smiled, her first real smile in a sea of dark days. Emily started over, one small step at a time. She hit up tiny bars, open mic nights where unknown artists could sing without a name. The crowds were thin, some half drunk, some scrolling phones, but she didn't care. When she sang, her voice rang out, bold, clear, raw with feeling, shattering her own limits. One night, amid the bar's clamor, a middle-aged guy with salt and pepper hair and a rumpled shirt approached her. "You've got a hell of a voice," he said, his tone warm and gravelly. I'm Jake, indie music producer. You've got something real, serious potential." Emily eyed him, half skeptical, half hopeful. Jake handed her a business card, adding, "Call me if you want to get serious." That night, sprawled on the thin mattress in her dumpy room, she stared at the card under the weak yellow light, her heart racing. For the first time, she saw a spark, small, but bright enough to ignite hope. Jake became her unexpected guide. He brought her to a cramped studio where the smell of stale coffee mixed with the hum of old speakers. "Sing," he said, perched behind the mixing board, his eyes lighting up as her voice filled the room. He didn't promise fame, but he believed in her, truly believed, and that was worth more than gold. Jake helped her record demos, got her gigs at small Texas music festivals. The crowds grew, the applause swelled, and Emily dared to dream of bigger stages, real chances. But just as hope cracked open a door, her family slammed it shut. One afternoon, during a break from work, she got a text from an old friend. "You okay? People are saying you dropped out, got into drugs, living on the streets." Her hands shook as she opened social media. Posts were spreading like wildfire across Austin. "Harper girl gone rogue. Emily Harper, from elite to gutter." With photos of her waiting tables, her tired face twisted into a pitiful caricature. She knew who was behind it. Sarah. Her sister had snapped those pics, spread those lies, turned her into a punchline to shield the family's precious reputation. The fallout hit like a tornado. A small label that had reached out to Jake backed off, muttering they didn't want the drama. Gigs dried up. Audiences eyed her warily, whispering behind her back. Emily felt like she was choking, like every ounce of her effort was swirling down the drain. The breaking point came one night at a dive bar on the city's edge. She stepped on stage, the dim lights hitting her tense face. But as she sang the first line, some jerk in the crowd shouted, "Hey, ain't you that junkie Harper chick?" Laughter erupted, then boos, a beer bottle shattering at her feet. Emily's voice faltered, her hands white-knuckling the mic. She wanted to run, to scream, but her legs froze. Finally, she threw the mic down and bolted outside, tears streaming as Austin's dusty rain soaked her through. She slumped on the curb, drenched, asking herself, "Should I just quit?" Jake found her, his jacket soaked but his gaze rock solid. He knelt beside her, grabbed her hand and said, "Emily, they don't define your talent. Don't let them win." She looked at him, rain mixing with tears, and in that moment she realized she wasn't alone. Jake pulled her up, dragged her back to the studio. "Record your song," he urged. "No one else, just you. Show the world who you are." That night, in the tiny room reeking of coffee, Emily sat before the mic, strumming her cheap guitar. She sang, not for the crowd, not for her family, but for herself. "Break the Chains" poured from her heart, each lyric a knife slicing through her past, each note a vow to rise. When the last chord faded, she smiled. Exhausted, broken, but alive. Jake clapped, eyes gleaming. "That's you, Emily. That's what's gonna change everything." She didn't know that when Jake uploaded "Break the Chains" to YouTube days later, it'd explode like wildfire, racing across the internet at breakneck speed. Thousands of views turned to millions, comments flooding in. "This voice hits me right in the chest." From the ashes of failure, Emily had planted a seed that would bloom into something dazzling, carrying her to the biggest stage she'd ever dreamed of, and a final showdown with her family. Emily's song "Break the Chains" roared through YouTube like a wildfire, blazing across phone screens, laptops, and the hearts of millions of strangers. From a few thousand views that first night, it rocketed to millions in a week, each play a dagger slicing through the lies her family had spread. Comments poured in. "This ripped my heart open. She's singing my story. Who's Emily Harper? She needs a bigger stage." In her dingy room, the laptop's blue glow lit up Emily's stunned face. She couldn't believe it. The song she'd recorded in desperation, through tears and rain, was now echoing worldwide. Jake called, voice cracking with excitement. "You did it, Emily! SXSW just reached out. They want you at the festival this year. This is your shot, the biggest of your life." SXSW, South by Southwest, the legendary Austin Music Fest where nobodies could turn into stars overnight. Emily clenched her fists, heart pounding like a war drum. This wasn't just a gig. It was her chance to prove who she was, not the failure her family branded her. Prep for SXSW was a whirlwind of sweat, nerves, and adrenaline. Jake morphed into her makeshift manager, scrambling to hire musicians, pick songs, and rehearse in the cramped studio. "Break the Chains" would be the centerpiece, but she wrote two more, "Rise from Dust" and "No More Shadows," each lyric a piece of her journey. Pain, grit, freedom. The night before the show, Emily stood in front of her cracked mirror, wearing a faded tee and torn jeans, clutching that pawnshop guitar. She stared at herself, not the fragile girl who'd knelt by her granddad's broken gift, but a fighter ready to take the stage and face the world. "I can do this," she whispered, her breath shaky but her eyes ablaze. Outside, Austin buzzed with festival energy, electric guitars wailing, crowds roaring, the air thick with beer and dust. She had no clue her family was coming, not to cheer, but to cash in. The big day dawned, Austin's sky a rare clear blue. But inside Emily, a storm raged. Backstage at the massive venue, she heard the MC boom. Next up, a rising star who's blown up online, Emily Harper with "Break the Chains." Thousands cheered, their applause a tidal wave pulling her on stage. Blinding lights hit her, heat prickling her skin, sweat beading on her brow. She gripped her guitar, fingers trembling as she struck the first note. "I was born in a cage, locked by their chains." Her voice soared, clear, fierce, cutting through the air, reaching every soul in the crowd. They went quiet, then erupted, singing along, hands raised high, lost in her rhythm. Emily's heart swelled, every ounce of pain and every tear now fuel for the power in her voice. But mid-song, she spotted them, her parents and Sarah, in the front row, stone-faced, not clapping, just staring with unreadable eyes. When "No More Shadows" ended on a soaring high note, the crowd roared like thunder. Emily bowed, tears glistening under the lights, not from sorrow, but pride. She'd done it, stood there on her own, No family, just herself. But that triumph cracked when Richard climbed on stage, mic in hand, his deep voice booming. "Thank you all for supporting my daughter. The Harper family is so proud of Emily." The crowd cheered, but Emily froze, her blood turning to ice. Eleanor and Sarah joined him, flashing fake smiles, hugging her like they'd never crushed her spirit. It hit her. They weren't here for her. They were here for the spotlight she'd built, to claim her success as their trophy. Emily snatched the mic from her dad, her breath ragged, heart hammering. The crowd hushed, sensing the tension like a string about to snap. She stared into Richard's eyes, then Eleanor's, finally Sarah's, her sister's smug gaze flickering with unease. "No," Emily said, her voice steady as stone, echoing through the speakers. "Don't pretend. You're not proud of me. You never were. You smashed my guitar, called me a failure, spread lies to ruin me. I'm here today not because of you, but despite you." The crowd buzzed, a few whistles piercing the air. She turned to the audience, tears streaming, but a smile breaking through. "Thank you for giving me a real family. Not by blood, but by love. And you," she pointed at her family, "thanks for teaching me I don't need you to win." She dropped the mic with a sharp clank, a full stop. Richard paled. Eleanor stiffened, Sarah gaped, but they were powerless as the crowd roared for Emily, drowning out any defense. She stepped off stage, legs wobbly, but her soul light as air, like she'd shed 1,000 pounds of baggage. Jake rushed over, hugging her tight, yelling over the noise. "You nailed it, Emily! You're a star!" Later, backstage, a guy in a black suit approached, holding out a card. "I'm with Big Machine Records," he said, impressed. "We want to sign you, right now." Emily glanced at Jake, then the card, her heart bursting with joy. She nodded, tears falling again. But these were victory tears. The deal was inked right there at SXSW, under the festival's blazing lights, marking the biggest turning point of her life. As she walked away, hand in hand with Jake, she glanced back at her family one last time. They stood there, small and helpless in the throng, eyes tinged with regret, but no power to hold her. Emily smiled, not a taunt, but a release. She'd won, not just on stage, but in her own heart. Now she knew who she was, and no one, not her parents, not Sarah, could take that away. But her story didn't end there. Beyond the spotlight, another happiness waited. A quiet, warm kind, like the soft glow of an Austin sunrise. SXSW faded into a blaze of lights and applause, but for Emily, it was just the start of a new chapter. One quieter, no roaring crowds, just gentle and warm like dawn breaking over Austin's gritty streets. The Big Machine deal opened doors to big studios, packed shows, and her songs crackling over Texas radio waves. Cash rolled in, enough to ditch the roach-infested room for a cozy downtown apartment, its windows framing the city's twinkling nights. But amid the fame, Emily didn't chase glory to fill her heart. She craved something else, a place to belong, someone who saw her not as a stage star, but as Emily Harper, the girl who'd been broken but never stopped dreaming. One April afternoon, as Austin's heat softened with a cool breeze, Emily wandered into a small art gallery in East Austin. She hadn't planned it, just spotted a flyer and let her tired feet lead her inside after a long recording day. In a room bathed in golden light, amid a chaos of paintings, she bumped into a lanky guy with messy brown hair, paint-stained hands clutching a brush. "Oh, sorry," he said, his voice deep and kind, bending to grab the handkerchief she'd dropped. Emily smiled, feeling an easy calm she hadn't known in months. "No worries," she replied, meeting his clear blue eyes. Honest, no judgment. He said his name was Matt, a freelance painter scraping by on sales at local markets. They talked about colors on canvas, the melodies she loved, and as sunset painted the windows gold, Matt shyly asked, "Want to grab coffee? I just like hearing you talk." Emily nodded, her heart giving a soft thud. Not the wild rush of a stage, but a steady beat she'd never felt before. Days later, Matt slipped into her life, slow and natural as spring creeping into Texas. They met at hole-in-the-wall cafes, her laughter ringing over the smell of fresh-baked bread as he recounted spilling paint on his best canvas. They strolled under streetlights, his hand brushing hers. No rush, no demands. He didn't know her online fame, didn't care. He just saw her. One night, on her apartment balcony, the breeze tugging at her hair, Matt turned to her, his eyes soft as a still lake. "Emily," he said, quiet but sure, "I'm no good with fancy words, but I like being with you. Not 'cause you sing, not 'cause you're famous, just 'cause you're you." Tears slid down her cheeks, silent. For the first time, she didn't need to prove anything. She could just be, and that was enough. But her peace couldn't hide from the past. One day, as she and Matt ate lunch at a roadside diner, the door chimed and familiar figures stepped in. Richard, Eleanor, and Sarah, dressed sharp like they were headed to a gala, but their eyes betrayed desperation. "Emily," Eleanor began, her voice trembling, "we need to talk." Emily set her fork down, hands clenching under the table, but her face stayed cool. "About what?" she asked, cold as a winter gust. Richard cleared his throat, grasping for his old authority. "We were wrong," he said slowly. "We shouldn't have smashed your guitar, shouldn't have pushed you. You've done well, and we want to be part of your life." Sarah stepped up, her once arrogant eyes dim with regret. "I'm sorry, sis," she whispered. "Give us a chance." Emily stared at them, faces that once defined her world, now just ghosts from another life. She saw it all again, the wood splintering under her dad's boot, Sarah's cruel smirk, her mom's cutting voice, a slow motion reel in her mind. She stood, stepping closer, her gaze unflinching. "No," she said, soft but steel hard. "You had your chance, and you chose to crush me. I didn't need you to succeed, and I sure don't need you to be happy." Eleanor sobbed. Richard went rigid. Sarah bowed her head, but Emily didn't waver. She turned, took Matt's hand. He'd sat there, quietly backing her, and said, "This is my family, not you." She walked out, hand in hand with Matt, leaving them stranded in the empty diner, powerless. In the months that followed, Emily and Matt built a life, simple but full. She still sang, still wrote, but now for joy, not proof. Matt painted, sometimes sketching her as she strummed on the balcony, his eyes brimming with love. One night, under Austin's star-strewn sky, Emily played her guitar, a gentle tune whispering through the air. Matt rested his hand on hers, smiling. "You know, I don't need the world to know you. I just need you here, with me." She leaned into his shoulder, happy tears slipping free. She'd found home, not in a mansion, not on a stage, but right here, with the man who loved her for her. Emily's story isn't just about winning on stage, it's about winning in her own heart. She learned happiness isn't handed to you, it's something you fight for, something you build. Family isn't blood, it's the people who stay, who love you no matter what. Those who abandoned her are now just faint shadows in her past, and she doesn't need them anymore. So, to all of you hearing this story, I've got a question. Have you ever dared to stand up for yourself? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to hit follow for more stories that'll light a fire in your soul.